All right, great. Okay. All right, this is the Automatic Updates Initiative update. This is something that's been in the works for a long time. There's existing work going on. Okay. My name is Ted Bowman. I'm a principal software engineer at Acquia's Drupal acceleration team. I'm the maintainer of Layout Builder and Settings Tray module, or co-maintainer, and I'm Ted Bow on Drupal.org and Twitter. So hand you over to Lucas.
Hi, this is Lucas Heading. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, as the case may be. I'm owner of an agency called MTech, and I subcontract for a large number of agencies. Primarily right now, I've been working with Tag One Consulting, and Migrate subsystem is what I co-maintain. I also helped build the version 1 of this core automatic updates thing in Contrib.
Thanks. So there's a lot of other people that are working on this project, and here are some of them. You can find us on the Drupal Slack at the Pound Auto Updates channel. We've also benefited a lot from the Composer initiative because we're trying to build something that uses composers to do auto updates. So a lot of the work that they've done, the Composer initiative, we're obviously going to benefit from. We're always looking for help. As you'll see in this presentation, there's a lot of different areas that we're working in, and it's not just working in Drupal core. So if you're interested in working in Drupal core, that's great. But if you're interested in working outside of Drupal core, we could definitely use your help too. So let's give an example of why security auto updates are important. On September 16th, there was a security release for 3 minor versions of Drupal. Mostly moderately critical, but some critical vulnerabilities, or a critical vulnerability. A month later, about 45% of the sites had not been updated that were affected. And anytime we talk about Drupal usage statistics and versions, there's a lot of caveats as far as this only deals with sites that have the update module installed, and some sites may have been patched, but they're reporting a different version. And also, this was not a highly critical security release. And even for any particular security release, not every site is vulnerable. You may have to have a certain module enabled or be having it configured a certain way. But even if we say, let's cut that to half, like 20% of the sites had not been updated, that's still something that we want to address. So, a lot of times these days, people expect auto updates. We have, WordPress has been doing it for about half a decade. If Drupal wants to compete in the backend for decoupled sites, services like Contentful that are software as a service, you don't really have to think about updating your site. So people have just sort of gotten used to this in a lot of different spaces. All right, yeah, Lucas, want to talk about the Contrib module?
Yeah, can you go back one slide?
Yeah.
And it's not just CMSs. We also see this when you decide to host your site. You pick your hosting platform, whether it's managed or unmanaged. If you want a VPS, or if you want to be able to manage the OS and updates there, or if you want to go to something that's more managed, like Pantheon or Acquia or Platform SH. We don't have it just in the realm of CMSs. We see it up and down the market space. So moving on to what we've already done, sort of what we did in the past, we built a Contrib module, learned a ton, but it had some significant, serious limitations. It does not support composer sites. However, like I said, we learned a lot. And we have a very secure system with it. And we're taking what we've learned from there, and we're moving this over to core now, which I'll hand it back to Ted.
Great. So, yeah, our goal now is to provide updates in Drupal core for Drupal core on the patch level. So this would be security releases, but also other patch level increases. So, if you're on 9.0. Well, it won't be for 9.0, but say you're on 9.2.1, and this would hopefully update you to 9.2, so 9.2.1 to 9.2.2 to 9.2.3. And we want these to be composer-based updates. We want them to be unattended updates, meaning it's not that you'll log into your site and push a button and it'll update your site. It will update your site just being on the web. And we want to have automatic rollbacks if something goes wrong, or just generally, we don't want to update your site and then just see if something goes wrong. So the first thing we're doing in the initiative is security advisory notifications. This is something the contrib module has now. And basically, this would be for highly critical security advisories, either for core or contrib. And the idea is every once in a while, these things happen, not really very often, maybe once a year, once every couple of years, there's a notification that we want to get out to as many people as possible to take action as soon as possible. And these are often like maybe released a few days or a week before a security release is going to happen. So if we can get this notification inside Drupal core, and even before Drupal, we have automatic updates, people will know, okay, something's coming down the pipe next Wednesday at the security window, and I should be ready to update right when it happens. So this is a patch that's was RTBC. I'm not sure if it still is, but hopefully it's pretty close.
And speaking to the regularity or frequency of these alerts, we've had this in contrib now for the last year, and not once have we decided as a community within the the security team of Drupal to post one of these high risk security advisories yet. So just it's not very frequent, but we want to be able to communicate this when it does happen.
Yeah. But once we get this into core, we can figure out as a community, like, okay, maybe is critical security release is something we want to push out. But for now, it's just only highly critical. So the other thing we're working on in core is the updates readiness checks. So this would be the very first feature of a new experimental automatic updates module. And when you download, say, if this gets into say 9.2 and you download the tarball or you install via Composer 9.2, you're not going to see this. It's only going to be in the dev version for right now. So the idea is we don't want to release a contrib module or experimental module that does a update readiness check, because it could be confusing if we don't actually have the updating happening. So it's going to be in the dev branch. You'll be able to see it if you do a dev install via Composer, or if you do a git clone. So hopefully once we actually have the updating happening, you'll be able to see this feature. And basically, the idea behind the update check is that we want to check to see on an ongoing basis, is your site ready to be updated? Because we don't want you to know maybe there's a security update happening, and you think, oh yeah, my automatic update system is just going to take care of it, but maybe your file permissions are wrong, so it's not going to actually, the process that Drupal will have won't be able to update your site, or maybe something is wrong with your between your file system and the Composer lock file is not in sync. So various checks, and then also it's going to create an API for that could be used by hosting companies or custom modules to put in specific checks. Okay, and then, so these are behind the scenes, these will be tagged services. They'll have warnings and errors. Errors will stop an update from even being attempted. The current patch, the warnings will not, but they're like, will let you know, say, hey, you're running out of disk space. You might want to address this. So let's talk about something that we are integrating with. This is outside of core, and this is the update framework, which is a separate specification put out by or hosted by I think the Linux Foundation and the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And it's a framework for securing software updates. So basically, this is something that there are a various number of other implementations. It started off, I think, from the Python community. So there's Python implementation. I think there's a Rust and a Go implementation in the works. And so we're being a part of the larger tough community, and we're getting a lot of feedback now from them, and we're pushing some ideas up to them, especially around testing. So basically, let's look at just a couple of the tough principles. There's a few, there's a lot more that you can go to their site and they have a really good sort of one-page introduction to what their principles are, but they consider an update system secure if it knows about the latest updates in a timely manner and is able for any files it downloads should be the correct files, and no harm can result from checking and downloading the files. And they consider trust should not be granted forever, and trust should expire if it's not renewed. So there's a metadata system of assigning roles of trust, and the roles expire, and then they would be renewed. But if you can't get, say, access to the signed system, if you can't get access to the information, you're not going to just assume that this trust goes on forever. And it really focuses on mitigating key risks. So rather than assuming that the private keys are always going to be safe, it's a system based around sort of revoking trust in the keys that you've put out.
Hey, Ted, I'm going to interrupt
Yep.
for a sec because we had a question
Yep.
come in.
Yep.
Maybe you want to address it. What about composer updates? If this all includes composer updates, it'd be really amazing.
Yeah, so this system will basically do a composer update, and we'll get to that. So it will, it will run probably via the composer PHP API, a composer update. And so it won't, it's not just going to download a version of Drupal and overwrite what you're doing there. There's other sort of implications for that as far as like how your particular workflow will go, but and we'll get to that in a bit.
Just to note, this is a bit of like a core conversation. So if you do have questions, go ahead and post them at any time. We do have a poll running right now. 60 of you guys have voted. We'll share the results of it at the end of the session. So far, the results are really, really interesting.
Okay. So let's look at a lot of the documentation and the specification for the update framework is, documenting certain types of attacks that you would, that a hacker would try to do against an update system. And then the specification and the client and the server workflow try to mitigate those attacks. So one example of attack is a rollback attack. And it basically presents you with older files that you've already seen, but the client would have no way of telling that these files are actually obsolete, and it gets you to install them. So if somehow a security release comes out, say in 9.2.7, but somehow a hacker is able to interfere between your connection with where you're trying to get updates and can convince you that like 9.2.6 is the latest update, and you update it and you think, okay, I've got the latest one and I'm secure. But because the hacker has sort of fooled you into getting the second to latest update, which doesn't have the security fix, then obviously now the hacker knows that you're vulnerable to a certain attack that was fixed in the next release. Another type of attack is an indefinite freeze attack. So this is where you present files to the software update system the client has already seen, and as a result, you're just unaware of new files. So it's a similar kind of attack where you're basically just making sure that you never can see a new file. So how we plan to use this is Drupal.org will use the Python library that implements the server side of the TUF framework, and it will sign the updates for Drupal core, and then each Drupal site will have a new dependency on the Composer plugin for the PHP. Basically, it'll be a Composer plugin that uses the new PHP TUF library. And so we'll get into a second how that works with the new Composer 2 improvements. But basically, each Drupal.org site will look for signing verification from Drupal.org when it gets these updates. And probably, let me see if that's on the next slide. Yeah, so probably what will happen is sometimes on an update, or I guess often on an update, we have to update something in our vendor dependencies too. So Drupal.org will sort of serve as a signing proxy for these vendor packages. So ultimately the sites will still get their updates from Packagist, but once they do download them, they'll look and say, okay, does Drupal.org have a signed verification that I got the right version of this vendor dependency? Ultimately, we would love for packages, this to be something that packages does directly. Right now, David Strauss and Benny Mack from the Typo3 community, David Strauss from the Drupal and other communities, and Benny Mack, who's the lead for Typo3, are working on an example repository that could be something that Drupal.org would use, and something that the Typo3 community could use for server-side signing. And on the client side, we're working with the Joomla and Typo3 communities for a new client, a PHP Tough that would integrate with the server side. So basically, the way that Tough works, the way that the libraries that we're using work is they create these JSON files of metadata. So the Python server side would create these JSON files, and then the client on Drupal or Joomla or Typo3 would retrieve them to find out information about what the latest target files are to have verification. So we don't need a PHP server-side version of the library, because there already is one, and it just produces JSON files that the PHP Tough file library can understand.
Ted, another question,
Yep.
if now's a good time. So it starts with a statement and followed up with a question. I'm not sure I would like a total set and forget, because I want to be able to check and follow what's happening, have controls to moderate the actions. For example, download and test the update, email me, but to defer applying until it's approved. Is this planned for some version of the system?
Yeah, I think a lot of the actual implementation on core, like how the user experience would happen, is not been, we're talking about it, but it hasn't been determined yet. But I would definitely think that hopefully there would be an option to say, don't update, but let me know when it would do an update. So, and I think some people will probably, one option also is to just leave this on, say, in a staging environment that is monitoring the updates, and maybe we'll apply the updates when they come down, and maybe email you then, so that you can test it in staging, but staging will automatically always be kept up to date. Definitely, I don't think this is, I guess right now we do have like 50% of the people say, yeah, I want to set it and forget it. But I think for a lot of sites, set it and forget it won't work. I think also a lot of the work that, because we're doing some of this work in new Composer plugins and the PHP Tough library, you don't necessarily, to get the benefit of this initiative, in the end, you wouldn't necessarily have to, or to get some of the benefit of this initiative, you wouldn't necessarily have to use the automatic update system in core. Maybe you just care about the verifications. Maybe you just want a way to update in a temp directory, but then you'll take care of the rest. So because we're using this through, Composer plugins, hopefully in our plan, and this is not, this is something we're striving for, but it's not, for sure that we'll hit it, is we want a lot of this to work from the command line, so that you could do a sort of a new command that will provide, like, I'll get into a sec, like Composer staged update, and it will do your update in the temp directory. And if you have the PHP Tough library, and also it will verify your updates from Drupal.org. Right, so on to some Composer 2 improvements. So Lucas.
Thanks, Ted. Sure. So Composer 2 came out, was it the end of August or beginning of September, fairly recently. And the improvements that we get with it are a bit twofold. We'll first start with the post-download event and dive into that. The post-download event is something that came out of some early proof of concept work last year as we were prepping for the version 2 of the auto update module, and the version 2 is then what's going to go into core. So version 1 has this is a bit technical, but we had a way to check before we download an artifact. But that doesn't really help us in our case here, because we want to download this thing And before we move it into your vendor folder or move it into /web/core or /web/module/contrib, we want to be able to inspect and do all of these things that Tough does to give us the assurance. We caught it at the perfect time because we were able to include inside of Composer version 2 this new event that allows us to inspect this while it's still in the temp folder before it's anywhere close to a place where you could have nefarious actions done on it from the worldwide from the web. So this is the first thing we did. The proof of concept used our earlier implementation using PHP Signify from version 1, but we'll be re-implementing that in Drupal core using Tough. Another benefit that I think has gotten a lot more blog posts, one here from Mike Anilo, is around the performance memory utilization. So I put it in bold and sort of air quotes here. Memory utilization averaged to be about 30 meg, peak of just under 100 megabytes for a site that had like 100 contrib modules, and it took 1.27 seconds to run. So we're dealing with two things here. One, in a shared hosting and a small hosting environment where you've only got 128 meg, 256. Most sites nowadays have somewhere between 256 and 512 of memory. We felt that 100 meg or less is great. So that helps us with the memory front. Closely related to that also is time. So we deal with this problem in PHP of timeouts, and the default is 30 seconds. We have to make sure that whatever we're doing here happens fast enough that we can do it within a request that's reasonable for most hosts, which at 1.27 seconds, even if that triples or is 10 times worse, we still probably have enough room to work with. So two big improvements. One is being able to inspect things in the post download, and the next one is memory details. Really, some really great gains using Composer 2.
All right, thanks. So I'm going to answer a couple of questions. Chris asked, the initiative name indicates core, but does this potentially cover contrib? Sounds like it from the conversation thus far. So I think the idea for the, there's nothing we're technically doing that would prevent contrib updates, because obviously we're going to be, sometimes we're going to have to even update vendor dependencies as a side effect. But I think the policy so far is that we're only going to include patch updates for core. And I think that is more like a rollout kind of, let's see how it goes implementation than we don't know how to do contrib. Because, we're hopefully sort of going to be making these sort of generic plugins that will work with Composer commands, or we'll sort of make a new command that'll wrap Composer update if we do the Composer staged sort of method. So we could easily point that at a contrib module. But I think the idea is it's just, it is kind of dangerous to do stuff into production. And also with contrib, we have less knowledge about, okay, is there some manual step that might be involved? So the plan is, I think, to just do patch level updates for core, and then move on to see like, okay, maybe everybody wants it for contrib, and see if that's possible. I fully expect that somebody will use the API to start updating, to update contrib, but modules in a contrib module, but I don't see it happening in core right away. But I think that's sort of to be determined to see how it goes with core first.
And the part of it is when we say core, we're saying this is a feature that's going into core as composed to our first rendition, which was a contrib module.
Yeah. And then Hugo asked a question about what are the similarities and differences for the Tough protection coming to the Python community's package index. I wrote my first Python code as part of this initiative So I'm very new to the Python community. We do have a BOF after this where there may be people that are more knowledgeable about it, or hopefully. They probably can't be less knowledgeable about the tough or Python community than me. But basically, I know that I think pip is a new Python package manager, and there is a proposal to use the Python tough library to secure their updates in the pip update manager too. And then there is the will this modify the composer JSON file? Probably, though it definitely would update the composer lock file because you would have a new version. Depending on how if you just do a composer update and you don't change your requirements, then potentially your composer JSON might not change. But if, say, we wanted to say, okay, we're going to pin it to this particular security release, then yes, the composer JSON file would change. So that, I think, is to be determined, but at the very least, it would change your composer lock file. So this is a sort of example of one of the problems of, we have your Drupal site and we have a visitor, and the visitor wants to keep visiting your site, but also you want to update it in production if you're using the automatic updates module when it's eventually there in that manner. So our current plan is that we would use Composer to do the update in a stage directory, and we're just sort of looking at how this would be possible. Our first idea on the Composer route was actually to have a plugin that ran, I forget what it ran. I think there's like a activate event in Composer, and basically we would sort of swap out some classes or reinitialize some classes and let them know that there's a new directory, vendor directory to install to. But that method seemed kind of fragile because if Composer changed something that we didn't know about in its first sort of bootstrapping, and it assigned the vendor, it notified this object of the vendor directory, and we didn't get a chance to update it, then there'll be part of sort of Composer's foundation that knows about the new vendor directory and part that doesn't. So our current thinking, or our current sort of prototype that we're looking at, is a Composer command that would be a new command. So you can define new commands in Composer plugins. That would be a sort of state, I think we're calling it staged update. And it would sort of wrap update to where it would say, okay, I'm going to copy things over into this temp directory and then do the update. There's a lot of sort of like complications in either method because it's hard to tell what needs to be copied over. Obviously, you don't want to copy over the site's default files directory because that's not something that Composer manages. And you don't want to copy it back because something could be being updated while or added by a user while you're updating. So that's a really obvious example we know about, but all Drupal sites are so different. There might be other stuff that, do we know whether this is Composer managed or this is really like site content? That's something we're just starting to look at. So we don't really have the solutions to it now, but we know it's sort of a thorny problem. But after that, it would, after everything's okay and it says, this update happened as expected, then we would move it over and actually hopefully copy over only the particular things that we need to copy. Another thing of the complications here is there could be edge cases where when you update via Composer and you say, okay, I just want to update core to this next version, it actually could force a contrib module to update because the old one was pinned to a particular version that you don't have anymore. And, I don't know, Composer's weird. So maybe you have another version, the next version of that contrib module is the only one that would work with this new security update because of requirements. So that's not very likely to happen, but we sort of have to think about these edge cases and what we would do in that situation. So if core's policy at first is not to support contrib updates, but updating to Drupal core forces a contrib update, what do we do? And I think we have an issue out there that just basically says, okay, what should our policy be in that situation? Because I think technically it's not a very well, this is a difficult space, but that particular problem I don't think is very difficult. We could just say, yeah, if you update a contrib module in the process, it's fine. Or we could say, no, our course policy does not support contrib right now, so we're going to send you a notification and say, sorry, we can't apply this update because it would also update this contrib module. And it also could update, say, your custom module if you have like a private package, maybe only your next version of the custom module would work in this case. So rollback, yes, we're going to get to that in a second. Okay, so we considered a couple options for like this sort of uninterrupted update method. Our first thing that we considered, and I think if you had seen previous initiative updates, we were considering this AB bootloader. And the idea was that we would do this sort of composer install into a B directory, and after the update, index.php would switch to this B directory as your new Drupal site. We haven't ruled that out completely, but our current idea with this composer staged update that I was describing before, a lot of, basically, we need to solve a lot of the same problems. So potentially we could do the composer staged update, it work great, and then say, okay, we're going to actually add the bootloader on top of that. But right now we're sort of thinking of the, the staged update as the way to go. And there was a question from Chris about rollbacks, but now I don't see it anymore.
Oh, I answered it and said we're going to answer, address it in about 2 slides.
Okay. Lucas, do you want to talk about the database update dilemma?
Yes, I would love to. So we dealt with this very briefly in the contrib module that came out with this. There's a handful of issues with it. One of it is we don't really know if you've got a database update until we actually try to update your site. So a bit of a catch-22, chicken and egg types problem. So to add on over and above that, we've got issues like class loading. So if you update a class with your composer update process or staged update process, there might be some issues where we have to call off to exec to some type of Drush-like CLI utility. Because if we've already loaded class foo earlier on an older version, and we try to load class foo again, it's going to get the older version, and we're not going to have the features. We also have the added issue of some sites by policy will say, yes, run them all, I don't care, take my site down. Or others will say, well, I don't know that I want to run an update if there's a database update. The first camp might be like on a staging site. The second one might be, I don't have a staging site. I'm on a small shared hosting. I can't afford to have my site go down, so roll me back. And how do we educate? So, this is a non-technical problem in many ways. We have to figure out the best way to communicate the pros and cons of how to deal with these database updates that come with Drupal contrib and core itself. The good thing, if it is a good thing, I think it is that the most highly critical updates that come are security. And if we're dealing only with core security things, there is not a recent core update that is required to also do a database update at the same time. So we'll have options in this module that say, run the security updates, right? And you can probably be pretty sure that you'll get the security updates regardless of whatever you choose for your database. So a lot of tough problems there. And thoughts and feedback, obviously, bring those to the BOF that is going to start here in a few minutes.
Yeah, so Chris had a question about, could we use D.O infrastructure to inspect the install file and figure out if there are updates? Yeah, I think that's sort of open question.
You can't.
Whether, you can't. Okay.
Because you don't know what patch has been installed on your specific site.
Yeah.
You don't know whether or not they've already installed or applied an update with a similar, with the same number. it's just not really possible, especially if you start jumping versions from version like 9.0.1 to 9.1.0. We're jumping like 6 versions, minor versions, yes, but depending on the state of the site, you might not know what updates have been applied or not been applied. It's on a per site basis, really.
Yeah. So long story short, it's a hard problem. Hopefully, with the most critical need for this, with the security updates, it won't be an issue. And I think also if we have this, I think already there's a real push with security updates to not include a database update if we can avoid it. Okay, so let's go to patch sites. Lucas, do you want to use your slide too?
Yeah. So couple, like, throw this out to the people questions here. So what do we do when we have a site that a developer goes and does a quick fix, or they patch it by using the patch command? We can't control what sites are doing. So how do we handle that? Previously, we were using a utility in version 1 that could give us very high level of confidence that the site is not hacked, and we had warnings saying that your site is not patched, or if it was patched or hacked. Because of the way Tough does its updates and with Composer, it got very difficult when you dealt with a Composer managed site to know whether or not vendor folder is what you thought it was. How do you handle vendor files that have been patched? So then the next question, so that's question number 1. Question number 2, tough problem, is do we or how do we support C. Wiegand's Composer patches? Do we just say, yeah, let's support it? And that would be the, us reaching out to a non-core set of software and sort of kind of assuming that it might be there, and then providing scaffolding to appropriately fail Composer install if the patches fail to install and apply. So again, some more questions. So how do we deal with Composer patches?
All right, cool. So I'm going to move on. There's a couple questions about database updates, and I think there is some good points in the questions. If people could come to the BOF just because they're running short on time, but also I think the questions point to, we may need changes in the update system or in making releases on Drupal.org to sort of define this, but definitely a hard problem. Lucas, do you want to take Git implications or?
The question says, what do we do with sites that are using Git, want to install this, but they've already checked in their vendor folder, or maybe they've checked in core contrib modules, or they've got dependencies that are in Git. How do we handle those? Do we need to handle those? Yeah. I think the obvious answer is probably not, but just something to think about. We deal with a very, 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 very diverse set of sites, and who's to say that some site doesn't have some type of Git workflow that when it sees files change, it doesn't trigger something.
Yeah, so I think sort of one of these is like we're gonna have to have good documentation about what's going to happen, especially if this is maybe a site that doesn't have Drupal specific hosting and uses just sort of a general hosting and enables this, but does use version control. Obviously, the production is going to change. You're not going to have a clean version of your site as far as Git is concerned, and you need to sort of take that into implementations how you use this. But I think hopefully, documentation about that will sort of take it a long way. We are in the process of reviewing the UX of or Emily Nouveau, one of my teammates, is in the process of reviewing the UX of the contrib module. And a lot of that will be, not everything, I think, from the contrib module is going to apply because, it's doing something slightly different. And also I think for core, usually how it works is we kind of have less user-facing options than contrib modules when they move in. So it may not be quite as configurable, but there are definitely a lot of things that will be similar as far as like, especially around the readiness checking UX. Like we still have the problem of letting people know in a really understandable way, like, hey, your site's not going to be ready for updates because of X, Y, and Z problem, or we think it won't be, but there's a warning. And so how do we tell the difference, and how do we make it clear for people to how they address any particular problems? So if you want to connect with us at Drupalcon, so there's a BOF right after this session. It really would be great to have people attend. I think on that session, we can more easily like add people to I think it's a general Zoom call. So, more than just me and Lucas can chime in, which would be great. And we have the contribution day on Friday. Please come. I'm hoping to get up really early, my time, to be there at 10:15 Barcelona time. So if you're interested in starting before then and want to find issues, you can at me on the auto updates channel in Slack. We have the Drupal core issues. We have the PHP Tough issues. We have a couple sort of like experimental repositories under PHP Tough, where we're just sort of thinking out some of these ideas. So we're, at the phase where we could use a lot of help in a lot of different areas. We have the Python sort of testing framework that we're trying to build for our library. And then sort of after DrupalCon, find us on the auto update Slack. We have bi-weekly meetings at 1900 UTC. And I think, so next week is the week that we're gonna have the meeting. So these are meetings that you can sort of follow along afterwards, or you can be there while you're there, or be there at the time. Look for our issues with, since we don't have a module called automatic updates yet in core, we're using the tag automatic updates initiative to find our issues. And then the PHP Tough library there, that's the main library. If you look at the org PHP Tough, there's some other sort of proof of concept libraries. And hopefully we're going to do some more virtual sprints. We've been doing these sort of 4-day virtual sprints in the fall, and I think they were really good for getting stuff moving.
Can we, Ted, do we have time to do our poll results?
Oh yeah. So we had the poll. What would you use?
What would folks guess?
Yeah.
What would folks guess?
Can they not see the answers?
No, not till I hit end and share results.
Oh, okay,
end,
cool. Sure.
Hit end, and now I'm going to hit share results. Okay, so hopefully others can see. We have a couple folks say no. So 6% say no. I don't think this is important for me, but it is for others. No one said this is not worth our effort. And we had 81 poll responders. So out of all of you, 81 were at least favorable to the idea, 100%, even if you didn't think you could use it on your own site.
Yeah, and I think the half that say they want to set it and forget it, I'm actually surprised, but that's great. That's great that many people would want to use it in that way. So, yeah, I think we're almost out of time with the questions. Most of them are around the updates, whether we could do a Drupal UI change, say this security release. Yeah, I think some of that stuff is possible, but definitely with like, we know what things are security releases. As Lucas was saying, it's harder to predict for any particular site if you have database updates. But because we're doing the temp directory, we can hopefully know at least after the download. So we don't apply an update, then be like, oh, whoops, this needed a database update, and we didn't write the code to do a database updates yet. So sorry, we messed up your site. We'll definitely try to avoid that. But I think being able to eventually run database updates, I think would be great. Yeah, but I don't know if that's MVP or not.
Thanks, Ted, for pulling this all together. He's the one who put in the submission. Thank you very much.
All right. Hopefully we'll see you all at the BOF. Thanks for showing up.